Hello, this is Michael Ellis. I'm with Kimberly LaPointe, and we have been going through a series, Spiral Dynamics, of stages of consciousness development in human beings. We are on what will be the last stage of the general explanations. And this is stage yellow. We'll be stopping at this point in terms of developing the stages, but we will. I'll come back and revisit all 7 of those levels, perhaps a little bit more briefly, but looking at it from theological, biblical angles to see how we see this in the development of Christian consciousness, in particular, Christian development, which I think you'll find very, very profound and interesting, and we'll begin that soon as well. So we're in stage yellow. The thing to say about stage yellow is we're at a real milestone. Stage yellow represents a big jump. When we go from green to yellow, we're going from the first tier, which is the first 6 levels, beige and purple, red, blue, orange, green, and now we're into the first of tier 2. And so it's a big jump between tier 1 and tier 2 in terms of human consciousness. What's so groundbreaking about that? Well, that's a good question to ask. What's the difference between these 2 tiers? Fundamentally, the main difference is that we've seen in these first 6 levels that these 6 levels don't get along particularly well. That when someone moves into another level, they often disdain something about the previous level that they just come from, and maybe even ones earlier on in their life. And there are conflicts and difficulties that can exist between these particular levels. They could even demonize one another, which makes it really, really difficult for somebody to move into another level when it's being demonized by someone at the next level up. So that is the problem that begins to be addressed in tier 2. With yellow and the beginning of tier 2, we now have, for the first time, people whose consciousness is developed where they understand and see and appreciate and encourage the spiral to come forward. They see all these levels, beige through green, and even the level they're on, and the ones that are yet to come. They see all these levels and see them as valid, as important, as those stepping stones of development. So there's not the demonization, there's not the rejection, there's not the animosity toward these particular stages, but rather an appreciation for them and an encouragement that these be healthy versions of each stage. So that's we've heard this term throughout about transcending and including. So we want to, in going from stage to stage, we transcend the stage that we've been into another, and we want to include always the best of the stage before. Harder to do when this animosity exists. But again, in yellow and in tier 2, they begin to see that importance and really embrace that idea of transcending and including all these levels. We've talked a bit about the rings of a tree. And that really comes into real focus when we get into tier 2, that we do see the rings. So we see that those are important growth markers, and they're not bad things that somebody's been in any particular growth ring or a level of development, a stage of development. So that's where we're going to go with stage 2. Big difference in terms of understanding that development. Now, we've made the point throughout that in the stages, it's not an automatic thing that a person has to move from stage to stage to stage. And in fact, as we looked at in parts of human history, there are only certain stages you could even get to. And if someone, again, what facilitates a move from one stage to another stage is that problems develop within that particular stage and the experience of people in a particular stage that can't be solved within that particular stage. So these problems begin to exacerbate that may propel people into another stage. But if there aren't problems that develop, people can stay at those stages permanently if they like. We want it to be in healthy versions of that, but they can stay stay there. There's no impetus there. So what we really want, what tier 2, and particularly when we look at yellow today, wants to do is to assure and work toward the health and of each of those stages, so that people at these particular stages are the healthiest versions of that they can be, and therefore reducing some of the conflict that may happen and keeping that spiral open so that people that are needing to move through it can do so without the resistance being as strong as we would have it in tier 1. So there'd be less, again, facilitating this people simply to move. We don't want a backlog. We don't want a barrier or some interruption in the ability for people to move through stages that really need to move into that. So, for instance, you might have a country that's in the stage red, that sort of dominating and domineering stage, which is very impulsive. Well, in today's world, it might be important for the people in a red culture to eventually move into being a blue culture with law and order and rules and regs and real community orientation and being good citizens, that sort of thing. But if it's all clogged up through all this animosity, then it creates problems. So tier 2 is wanting to help facilitate that move and to reduce those tensions, conflicts, and demonization. So we want to unplug, unclog, unblock those particular moves. Now, one second thing we'll speak briefly to that happens in tier 2 is that tier 1 is focused primarily on all 6 of the stages in one way or another, focused on survival. In tier 2, we actually see being, that's fundamental being as a human being, as being the important things rather than simply survival. So in tier 1 looks at things and asks, how can this thing serve me? In tier 2, they're looking at these particular things, same things, and they're seeing in those particular things the thing in itself, rather than what it can do for us or serve it. It's got value, strength, importance, and a place in the universe that's important that only it can fill. So that's another fundamental change that happens in tier 2. Now, this first stage of tier 2 is yellow, which we're looking at today. And here are a few words. The purpose of doing this is not to be completely comprehensive, but to kind of give you a splash of a lot of the different aspects so you can begin to grasp and sort of see a picture, a photograph of what this kind of looks like, and then we'll break some of it down a little bit further as we go along. So here's some key descriptive words and phrases which describe stage yellow. It's individualistic. Yellow are loners, independent, intelligent, knowledgeable, learned, quick learners. They're the information elite. They're well-read, competent, insightful, visionary, effective, systems thinkers, getting to the root, balanced, non-manipulative, wise, open-minded, non-threatening, tolerant, big picture people, intuitive, efficient, pragmatic, and nuanced. So you can begin to see a picture there, I hope. So well, let's look at some statistics. I mean, as we can imagine, stage yellow, what is that about? It seems some of the stages where we've experienced them or we can certainly see them prominently in our culture, we say, oh yeah. Yellow is something that only about 1% of the adult population in the world are in stage yellow. So it's a very, very small percentage. However, even that 1% has about 5% of the world's influence. So it's a small group and a small sampling, if you will. More people we can suppose will be moving into stage yellow, but at this point it's about 1%. So that's a very small amount that are in this tier 2 at all. So what precipitates a move from the green stage to the yellow stage? Green was the last of the tier 1. We talked about that the last time. And just like every other stage, green has its benefits and its values, and it's got important contributions it makes to the human experience, but it's also got its limitations. It's got its own problems that can develop. And so what happens with green that precipitates a move to yellow is the world is in fact faced with a lot of really serious problems. Some of those are social problems, some of those are political problems, some of those are environmental problems. They're very serious things that are threatening our world. We know that. And unfortunately, green solutions tend to be a bit more shallow and difficult to apply, or more idealistic. And so when we are faced with these problems and one begins to see them clearly, and see that green just doesn't have that capacity really to solve them. We can identify them perhaps, but have a difficulty in solving them, then that can be a move to yellow, because yellow is going to be about solving these problems in very specific and concrete and direct ways. So that could be a huge impetus for somebody to move into yellow from green. And so what we see is that green sees the problems, but doesn't provide necessarily the structure to really reach any kind of long-term lasting solutions to these particular problems. And there's a lot of passion that green has for these particular causes, which is great to have that passion. But the passion alone, without a great strategy for changing things, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to make the changes possible. One example I'd like to put out there for you is the Occupy Wall Street movement. We know about that. It was in the news for weeks and weeks. A lot of emphasis and a lot of press on that. And we had people out there feeling like they're really doing good, they're making a difference. But at the end of the day, the thing disbands. And did it change anything about Wall Street in any particular way, positively or negatively? Didn't seem to make a bit of change, from my point of view. And I think that's really exemplary of what green limitations are. You be passionate about it, get out there and do the work of being concerned about it, but the concern alone is not necessarily changing anything. And so what can move one to yellow is a frustration with that kind of fruitless activism that we can see at times in green. And so that's the impetus for moving to yellow. Yellow wants to get to the root of the problem, not be content with a superficial analysis and application, but to get to the root of the problem, really be able to assess the problem and see very clear solutions and begin to work toward those solutions. And this is what we would call systems thinking primarily, that yellow is all about, of thinking about these things systemically and again, getting to the root of them rather than glossing over and just doing a reactionary or passionate kind of reaction, rather really drilling down and getting to where we can see and address those problems systemically. Another thing that happens in green as an impetus to move to yellow is that there can be a frustration with green's communal emphasis being so incredibly strong and insisting on consensus in terms of decision making, that there can be a very cumbersome, inefficient, and very slow response to these incredible problems that we have. It doesn't move well. It doesn't. When it's waiting for everybody to come along, it can't make those quick changes and those deep dives to bring everybody along at the same time. And so that's why we would see in yellow a move to the individualistic side. Remember that in spiral dynamics, we're always moving from stage to stage in a pendulum, from a communal stage to an individual stage, back and forth. So we move from the communal green into now an individualistic stage that is not encumbered by the consensus model and the communal emphasis. Now, that presents some other problems too, which we'll get into. But nevertheless, it's a response to this. And so we see these individuals in yellow that begin to start to make a difference. And that involves a break from this communal thinking, which can actually set that person up for a little bit of lashing out by people that are in green, because they're often seen as people that are going their own way, of being selfish, because they're not waiting for everybody to come along in this communal consensus model. That these people are somehow breaking the bonds of harmony with the group by launching out on their own. Now, if yellow has the strength, or people moving to yellow have the strength to kind of bear up underneath that, which often they do, and we'll see some characteristics as to why they might have that kind of inner strength that makes them resilient, be able to not be particularly affected by the critique and the accusations, so that they can actually be in a position to make a difference. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kimberly now. She's going to talk about some characteristics of yellow and some other aspects of this stage.
Okay, thanks. So in yellow, as Father Michael said, you, for the first time, have a clarity of vision. So by that, we mean that you see the whole spiral as it really is, and not through the lens of, for lack of a better word, bias of the color that you are sitting in. So all along, as we've talked about the tier 1 colors, we've talked about sort of what's triggering about other colors. If you are blue, you're triggered by this about red, and you're triggered by that about orange. But when you reach yellow, you have a clarity of vision about the whole development of consciousness behind you. And so you see it objectively, and you're really in a position to tangibly help address pressing needs, because you can really see all others in an objective way, and sort of what they bring to the problem. Yellow is also marked by a reduction in the prevalence of ego. And so ego is pervasive in all of us. It's a personality construct in our development. It lets us interface with people and groups and causes and things that we get involved in. And it's a great value to us in that social connection, but it's not really who we are truly in ourselves. And so, Father Michael, for instance, talks often about the false self versus the true self in his sermons. And so some think of the ego in that way. And when you apply that lens, you know that spiritual and personal growth can be helpful to us if we're going to cut out that dominating ego and let our true self begin to really take shape and be productive. And so this is the main work that people who have done the Enneagram workshops with Father Michael know, is sort of what that's all about, of kind of getting to the core of who you really are and setting aside that ego piece. People who get to yellow will have done that work and really understanding that and letting the ego part of their personality become, less prevalent, and are able to push it down. And the result is far less defensiveness towards, people who are in other colors or of other minds. They need less self-protection, they have better openness, and they have more patience for the shortcomings and foibles of other people that result that come from the ego dominance in other people. Although yellow is a move back to the individual, as we've been going, individual to a community to individual to community mindset, and it is a move back to that more individual, but for the first time, it's not really coming with the same judgments of what came before it, and it's not at the expense of the next, the way that our other individualized colors have been. So yellow cares for self, but not at the expense of others, certainly the way that orange did, and the way that even blue does to some extent. I'm sorry, blue is collective, but orange and red did to some extent. So it might be helpful then to review as we go through. Beige, that expression of self is all about staying alive. We didn't spend a whole lot of time, getting into the ego pieces of that, but basically it's just staying alive. Purple is sacrificing that for tradition and ancestral, and that's where the sort of mystical got involved. Red is a return to that sense of self in terms of dominance and growing in power and, impulse. And I just want to, get that power and dominance and heck with everybody else. Blue is more about that collective sacrifice of that ego and that self, but in service to a real truth or a higher power or something, some absolute. Orange is expression of self, but in that orange way. So it is in that, sort of greedy, driven, ruthless, sort of resource exhausting way. Green returns to that sacrifice for community, so that the self may thrive, but it's sort of, that total let go, and just to that total egalitarian view. And then yellow comes back to the expression of self, but not at the expense of those resources, and rather to advance, everybody towards a solution. Yellow is like orange in the sense that knowledge is power. So in the interest of solving big, serious, complex global problems, yellow turns to information. Orange, is the last place that we saw that interest in power and knowledge, but that was more for the sake of personal gain, whether it be money or accumulation of resources, or even just sort of credit or accolades. Orange was really in that pursuit. In yellow, it's largely free of the need for all that personal affirmation, and it's more just wanting knowledge for the sake of solving looming problems, for the sake of the world or big systematic failures. Yellow expects to be fairly compensated, as an individual, but it isn't its primary driver or their primary driver the way it is in orange. Persons in yellow may be accused by others of being intellectually elite, and they are. However, they should be or are in most cases free of that sense of superiority, or ego that's attached to that. It's just a fact. They are elite in terms of their knowledge. Yellow is always learning and interested in very diverse topics, and they have a multi-perspective view, and their learning feeds all of those perspectives. They value competence, so the earlier stage solutions and strategies are welcome if they're working towards solving a global problem. They alone, though, will not get the job done. So while respecting natural hierarchies like the spiral itself, it does not operate within man-made hierarchies. This reminds one of the adage in Alcoholics Anonymous: the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And so yellow will not just give way to, man-made ways of doing things. They will take a step back and think, actually, what is the system that's going to be more effective? Yellow is not particularly interested in positional authority, although they might often wind up there. It's not, again, their primary driver. But rather the authority that comes from competency. The best person for the job is the one who should be doing the job regardless of their position. Yellow, therefore, has high regard for competency in others and looks to work only with competent people. Coming back again to systems thinking, yellow wants to get to the root of all things, which will be necessary if you want real and lasting solutions. Green will have identified many of the same problems because they tend to look out at the world and say, what is wrong, because they are very worried about the larger community. But their solutions are often simplistic or superficial or emotionally reactionary. So just about drawing attention to it or raising awareness, but not necessarily dealing with the practicalities of the difficulties of changing them. So instead, yellow, instead of just wanting to take down a system, so green often just wants to tear down a way of doing things, yellow will assess, investigate, study, and research and seek to understand an existing system and then try to make a profound and effective change. They won't be Band-Aid solutions. They will be, systematic solutions. Yellow is able to hold diverse and even conflicting ideas together without being influenced by them, allowing for a sound assessment of all ideas. However, for yellow, not all ideas are equal, valid, or helpful, and thus one must glean what they can and let go of the rest. Also an AA saying, take what you like and leave the rest. Every idea will have something, even a kernel of truth in it, and yellow is curious to find it. So, you know, again, taking in all information, but not treating it all as equal, you know, really assessing it for the soundness, the truth, the effectiveness, you know, or the rigor around it. And not treating everything as a binary. So a lot of our society, because we're in the lower colors, think that it's all one way or another, and yellow would have a much, you know, a much easier time holding the merits of two sides of an argument. Examples of yellow. This is a harder task than it was with the earlier colors because it is such a small percentage of people who exist and systems or societies that exist in yellow. So, and additionally, since the characteristics of this stage is to be a loner and liking to work individually, yellows are not always famous or prominent either. And so, you know, there are less examples that would be kind of widely accepted as yellow in the popular culture. And also, since yellow is just emerging in human consciousness, even though the most influential yellow personalities, they may not be a household name yet. So because people are just getting to this level more widely, you know, the best is yet to come as far as that. But here's the examples we have. Quantum mechanics, Joe Rogan, Claire Graves, and Don Beck, who were the developers of Spiral Dynamic, you might remember. Ken Wilber, who's also been a big follow-on scholar on spiral dynamics. Father Richard Rohr, Bob Bell, a yellow variety of a vegan. So as a matter of principle and concern of the earth, but without the militancy of green vegans. Yellow can let others be where they are with food choices. Green normally wants to pressure all vegan to be as they are themselves because they feel that they are solving something by doing that. Abraham Maslow, who certainly understood that hierarchy of needs. Eben Pagan, Noam Chomsky, Deepak Chopra, Carl Sagan, Barack Obama. And remember, we have those tree rings. And so you can be very much, you know, have a green value system or part of, or green ring in your circle, but be a yellow systems thinker. Joseph Campbell, chaos theory, futurist, the leading edge of academia. The humans and Vulcans of Star Trek, where the prime directive was not to interfere with the development of another culture. So that would be, you know, again, that clarity of vision when you look back at the spiral of understanding that cultures are where they are and that they need to be there and that they need to progress through there. So it's a very yellow rule to not interfere with the development of another culture. Sustainable living, ecology, modern versions of urban planning. Conflict resolution, Wikipedia and all open source ventures. So the idea that knowledge is not proprietary. Elon Musk, Buckminster Fuller, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, those are the Google founders, I didn't know that one, and Steve Jobs. So I'm going to hand it back to Father Michael now for dangers of yellow.
Yeah, dangers of yellow is a little harder to identify than it has been in some of the earlier stages. Again, because we've had fewer people that have come into yellow, such a small percentage. And actually the next stage, which we're not going to go into because I don't think we have the capacity to explain it. It's perhaps beyond our pale right now. You know, we also have so few people that have gone all the way through the depth of yellow to start hitting the ceiling of what yellow needs to do, which is then going to be the emphasis to move into turquoise in the next stage. And we haven't had enough people to really hit that. So it's hard to know what are the problems that are going to develop in stage yellow that will be the impetus for moving into stage turquoise. But we can hazard a few guesses about this. One is that we talked about the individualistic nature of stage yellow, that they've kind of broken from the pack and they're doing these things on their own. There's a little bit of, again, with competent people, they will work, but they still have some difficulty with teams in their own right. They tend to be these lone wolves, and they operate that way. And as we know, I mean, if you live that way, it can end up in being a very lonely existence. And so it could be that for people in yellow that have spent some time there, that the loneliness begins to be an impetus to move into the communal turquoise that will be the next stage. Makes a lot of sense. And so there'll be maybe a hunger for that kind of community that is expressed in the next stage. Yellow probably could also be very emotionally distant because of that lone wolf stance that they often will take. Now we have seen, as Kimberly was describing, the loosening of ego in yellow, which has been significant, but it's not completely full-blown for people in yellow. And so there's still a lot of work to do ahead in spiritual growth and development and self-understanding, which can be the impetus toward turquoise that appears is going to have a lot more of that kind of self-understanding and growth and development that can be the hunger leading us to the next stage. So they have a good base in yellow, but again, a problem can be that yellows is so much in its head in terms of information that can have its own limitations. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but simply thinking and mulling things over can result in inaction. And one of the ways that can happen, I think, for people in yellow is that there's always more information that you can get, and more and more and more, and yellow loves information and seeking that out. But the downside of that could be that it might move us into some inaction there, because there's always just another book on this, and then we'll have it down, right? So there's always a lot more that you can learn before acting. There also is the possibility, even though there's an openness in yellow, there's a possibility that being an informational elite might kind of catch us by surprise, go to our head a little bit, and some arrogance could potentially develop as a danger there. So feeling superior to others can be also an outcome there that yellow can have as a danger. Another risk of being idealistic and visionary is that we're often not pragmatic enough and finishing things that need to be finished. Those are some of the dangers. So the next stage, and we talked about this a little bit in talking about the dangers, the next stage is turquoise. There are a small number of people that have moved to this stage, so little information about where the ceiling is. But we can presume, again, because of the pendulum swing between an individual stage and a communal stage, that turquoise is going to be in this next stage a highly communal stage, and that will be that attraction for yellow moving into that. It's going to be very, very communal. In what way? I don't know that we have the capacity to describe that, but we see this kind of deepening of the experience as we go through the different stages, and we can presume that this level of community is like nothing like what we've seen before in the human experience. Now, what that's like, I'm not in a position to describe that for sure. One of the things, too, I think that we can be pretty solid about is that it's going to be more interested in spirituality. Yellow is not opposed to it, but it's not its primary motivation. Again, the information and knowledge is going to be yellow's principal source for solving things. But there's going to be more of a spiritual dynamic in turquoise that does appear. And mysticism will be also prominent again. Now, when we saw mysticism before, when we got in the second stage in purple stage, there's mysticism and magic, but that is different than what we're talking about in turquoise, because in purple, it is pre-rational. Then we see all these developments into the rational, particularly highlighted in the stage orange. We're beyond stage orange now, so we're in post-rational mysticism that we, again, I'm not in a position to describe what that's going to look like fully, but that it's going to be different than purple, but also very, very mystical, and really in touch with the spiritual dynamics of human life and life in the world. We also have seen in each of the stages an increasing circle of inclusion that's gone on from stage to stage to stage. Like for instance, beige is just concerned about himself, and then we get into the tribe, right? So we see these openings. Green's very, very open to the whole world and the creatures of the world. And yellow's now taken us into a broader scope, where it's about the beginning to look at the whole universe. And we can assume turquoise is really going to take that even further out. It's going to get very cosmic in terms of its level of interest. And now what that looks like, I don't know. I mean, it's just beyond me. But, it's one of those things that I can't fathom right now. But I think that, again, we talked about Star Trek of going where no man has gone before. And I think, turquoise is going to be that from our perspective of going into these dimensions that humanity has never been before. And that's true at every single stage we've looked at. It's a new dimension, a new opening, a new level of consciousness, human consciousness that has never been in existence before it comes into existence. And so we see this in yellow to turquoise as being another stage. Turquoise, there's very, very few people that are in that stage, so it's very, very difficult to describe. But we think these are some of the aspects of what we may see in a move turquoise. So that's actually concludes these first 7 levels from the general point of view. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, that I will be coming back and talking about these 7 stages, once again, going beige through yellow, looking from theological, philosophical, and biblical points of view. I think you'll find it very, very interesting, and maybe helping sort out for you some of your own spiritual development, where it has been, where it is now, where it potentially could go, which I think you'll find fascinating and interesting, and maybe a bit of propulsion for you into some new dimensions of your own spiritual life. And certainly by understanding it, hopefully kind of from a more yellow kind of point of view, that we can appreciate people, Christians in particular, there are these particular stages, and understand why they're there, what it's like to be there, and appreciate that and help them if they want to continue to move into greater levels of their spiritual development as based on the spiral dynamics. I want to thank Kimberly too for joining me on this journey. It's been really, really fun for me to get to work with Kimberly, and she's added so much to all of this study, and it's been great sorting through this together, being a little tiny team, at least.
Thank you so much for having me. I learned so much.
Yeah, I think we're both kind of individuals in our own right, but we've been able to team up in a wonderful way, I think.
But we're individuals who want so badly to be yellow, so.
Why not? We want to be yellow for sure. But any final thoughts you've got on anything, Kimberly?
No, I think just the thing that for me has been so helpful is, and I guess it is putting a yellow hat on, if I could be so bold, at least a little bit. But I think that the more time you spend really reflecting on these things, the easier it really is to find sort of empathy at the least, and at the most, even some appreciation for all the different stages and where people are. And to remember that so little is sort of binary, and you're always kind of being pulled between 2 forces. That's what's been very helpful for me to think about each color, especially in tier 1, and where they came from and where they may or may not be going next, in terms of the pressures and problems and the way that they perceive the world. So, and myself included. So I hope that everyone else sort of got that out of it too. Again, it's not a pressure to move anywhere but where you are, but at least enough of a yellow ring to sort of view the rest objectively and with some appreciation and empathy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Kimberly LaPointe. I appreciate it so much. It's been great, and I appreciate everybody who's been viewing this. And the journey continues if you'd like to come along.
Yes.
Take care.